March 1984. Warner Brothers Studios, Burbank, California. The executive conference room on the third floor. Dark mahogany table, brown leather chairs, film posters on the walls, gold records in frames. The accumulated evidence of an institution that had been right about enough things, often enough to develop a very high opinion of its own judgment. It was a Tuesday morning, coffee cups on the table, yellow legal pads open with the notes of a meeting that had been going on long enough to generate opinions. Four studio executives on one side, one man standing on the other, lean, early 50s, dark jacket, both hands flat on the mahogany surface, with the posture of someone who has been presenting something and has just finished. In front of him, a screenplay, cover page visible, two words in clean type, pale rider. The man standing was Clint Eastwood. The man in the center opposite, silver hair, expensive gray suit, was laughing. Not the polite laugh of institutional diplomacy, the full, open-mouthed laugh of genuine disbelief. Head tilted back, both hands on the table. The laugh of a man who had heard something so completely, obviously wrong, that containing the reaction wasn't worth the effort. The younger executive smiled with the reflexive agreement of someone who had learned which direction to point his reactions. The older man on the far right did not laugh. Watch the scene with the narrowed, troubled attention of someone keeping his own counsel about something he suspected his colleagues had not fully considered. What nobody in that room understood, what the laughing man would spend the next 30 days discovering at significant personal and professional cost, was that the screenplay on that table was going to become one of the most successful Westerns in a decade. And the man standing across from the laughter already knew it. To understand what happened in that room, you have to understand what Westerns meant in Hollywood in 1984. They were finished. Heaven's Gate had lost $40 million in 1980 and nearly destroyed United Artists in the process. The genre that had defined American cinema for 50 years had been declared dead with the specific finality that Hollywood reserves for things it has decided are no longer commercially viable. The executives who ran the studios in 1984 had developed a professional reflex so strong it had become indistinguishable from conviction. Westerns do not make money. The audience has moved on. The era is over. Clint had read Pale Rider, a story about a mysterious preacher arriving in a California mining community to help independent gold prospectors against a powerful strip mining operation, and had understood immediately what it was. Not a Heaven's Gate, not an epic sprawl that confused scale with substance. Something leaner, older, more essential. A story about the moral clarity that Westerns at their best had always been about. He had brought it to Warner Brothers because Warner Brothers was his studio. The relationship going back years, the institutional home of Dirty Harry and everything that followed. He brought it with the quiet confidence of a man presenting something he understood and expected the room to understand. The room had not understood. The room had laughed. And now Clint Eastwood was standing at the conference table looking at the laughter with the expression of a man deciding, in real time, what to do with information that had just confirmed something he already suspected. The executive laughing, Richard Harmon, 22 years in the industry, president of production since 1979, was not laughing out of cruelty. That distinction matters. He was laughing out of certainty. The specific, dangerous certainty of a man who has been right about enough things that he has stopped fully considering the possibility of being wrong. "Clint," he said when the laugh settled, "it's a Western." "Yes," Clint said, "we just watched Westerns die. Heaven's Gate took down a studio." "Heaven's Gate was 3 hours and 39 minutes long," Clint said. "It cost $44 million. It had spectacle in place of story. Pale Rider is not that film. The audience doesn't know that. They see Western, they stay home. That's not a preference anymore. That's a pattern." "You're directing this yourself?" Harmon asked. "Yes." "Starring in it?" "Yes." Harmon leaned back, the lean of a man about to say something he considers self-evident. "Clint, you haven't directed since Firefox in '82. The market won't support a Western. Not now. Not from anyone." "I directed Outlaw Josie Wales," Clint said. "I directed Bronco Billy. I directed Play Misty for Me. I know how to make films." "Of course you do." The smile that is not a smile, professional warmth that means nothing except that the conversation is over. The answer is no. A Western, directed by and starring you, in 1984, is not something we can get behind. He said it with complete, untroubled confidence. The confidence of a man holding all the evidence and all the precedents and all the institutional memory of an industry that had watched a genre collapse in real time. He was wrong about almost everything, but sitting in that chair, behind that table, with 22 years of industry experience arranged behind him like a wall, he had no way of knowing that yet. Clint looked at him. The room was quiet with the specific silence of people performing neutrality while paying extremely close attention. He looked at Harmon, at the younger executive and his suppressed smile, at the older man on the far right, Walter Gaines, 61, who had not laughed and whose expression communicated something none of his colleagues were reading. He looked at the screenplay on the table. Pale Rider. He had read it 6 times. He knew every scene. He knew what it could be in the hands of someone who understood it and was willing to make it without apology. Something happened on his face. Not quite a smile. Something smaller and more devastating. One corner of his mouth, barely. The expression of a man who has received confirmation of something he suspected and has now stopped giving the room the benefit of the doubt. The expression of someone who knows exactly how this story ends and has decided that explaining the ending to this room would be a waste of everyone's time. He picked up the screenplay, put it under his arm. "All right," he said. 2 syllables. The compression of a man finished with a room. He pushed his chair back and stood to full height. Walter Gaines watched him rise with the expression of someone watching a door close that he is not certain should be closing. He said nothing. In the specific hierarchy of that room on that Tuesday, his uncertainty did not have enough institutional weight to change the direction of the current. He watched Clint pick up the screenplay and noted privately that the man did not look like someone who had just been told no. He looked like someone who had just been given permission. He walked to the door. Nobody spoke. The room had the silence of a place that has just said something it cannot unsay and is processing the texture of what follows it. At the door, Clint stopped, turned back once, the single final look of someone confirming the room has heard everything. He looked at Harmon, at the screenplay under his arm, back at Harmon. "You'll want to remember this meeting," he said. Not a threat. Information. The impersonal delivery of a man stating something he considers factual in the same tone you'd use for the weather. He walked out. The door closed. In the conference room, Harmon looked at Mills. The laugh that followed, shorter, quieter, the laugh of 2 men confirming a shared judgment in the absence of the person it was about, lasted approximately 4 seconds. Gaines did not participate in it. "Richard," he said. Harmon looked at him. "I've been in this industry 30 years. I've watched a lot of people walk out of rooms." He looked at the door. "Most of them look like they've lost something." He picked up his coffee cup. "He didn't look like that. He drove off the Warner Brothers lot at 11:45. He drove to his production company, Malpaso, the operation he had been building since the late 1960s specifically for moments like this one. When the institutional machinery of a major studio decided that what he wanted to make was not what they wanted to finance, Malpaso was his answer. Lean, efficient, organized around the principle that the people best positioned to decide whether a film was worth making were the people who understood what the film was trying to be. He sat down, put Pale Rider on the desk in front of him, made 4 phone calls. Line producer, director of photography, production designer, casting director. The budget they arrived at, $8 million. Lean for a Western with location shooting in the Sun Valley Mountains of Idaho. Achievable with the specific economy of a production that knew what it needed and had no interest in anything else. By 2 in the afternoon, 3 hours after Harmon had laughed at the screenplay, Pale Rider was in pre-production, not in development, not in discussion, pre-production. This was what the people who underestimated Clint Eastwood consistently failed to understand. He did not require their belief in the project to make the project. He required his own, and his own had never been in question. April 1984. The trade papers ran a brief item. Clint Eastwood had set up an independent production of a Western, Pale Rider, with distribution to be announced. Warner Brothers had passed. Harmon read it, made a note, did not change his assessment. Casting announcements followed. Michael Moriarty, Carrie Snodgrass, Chris Penn. The production taking shape with the quiet efficiency of an organization that had made films before and knew exactly how to make them again. Then the location photographs. Sun Valley, Idaho, the Sawtooth Mountains. Landscapes of genuine, unhurried grandeur. The specific visual grammar of a Western, made by someone who understood that the landscape was not a backdrop, but a character, that the American West's emotional power came from its scale and its indifference to human drama. Industry word on the script reached Harmon through the normal channels. Consistent. The film was being made efficiently, under budget, with the focused energy of a production that knew what it was doing and why. He began around the third week of April to feel the first intimation of something he was not yet ready to name. It arrived not as one large piece of information, but as an accumulation of small ones. Casting better than a failed project warranted. Location work that didn't look desperate. Script notes using words like lean and purposeful and the Western we've been waiting for. Each piece individually dismissible, together forming a shape he recognized. May 2nd, 1984. 32 days after the conference room. Harmon made a phone call. It was unusual, not unprecedented. Studios changed their minds about projects with enough regularity that the machinery for such reversals was well established. But the circumstances of this particular reversal had a quality the usual machinery wasn't quite designed for. He had passed on the project. He had laughed. And Clint Eastwood was not a man who forgot rooms that had laughed at him. Both facts were institutional record, and now he was calling to ask if there was a path back in. Clint returned the call that afternoon. Harmon expressed Warner Brothers' continued interest. The phrasing of someone walking backward through a door they had previously walked forward through, trying to accomplish the reversal with enough grace that the reversal itself would not become the story. Clint listened to all of it. When Harmon finished, Clint said, "The distribution deal is available. The creative control is not." Harmon said he understood. Complete creative control. Final cut. No notes after principal photography begins. Warner Brothers distributes. That's the arrangement. A pause on the line. "Yes," Harmon said. The single syllable of a man who had spent 32 days arriving at the understanding that the person he laughed at had known something he hadn't, and that the cost of that knowledge was agreeing to terms he would not have agreed to a month earlier. Yes, that works. Pale Rider opened June 26, 1985. Opening weekend, $12 million. The biggest opening for a Western in years, in a genre declared dead, in a market supposedly incapable of supporting it. By the end of its theatrical run, $41 million domestically against an $8 million budget. The highest grossing Western of the year, reviewed with the specific, slightly embarrassed enthusiasm of critics acknowledging that something they had written off had turned out to be worth something after all. Harmon read the numbers, had the conversation with Gaines he had been avoiding since the third week of April. Gaines said nothing particularly memorable. The numbers said it for him. What Harmon did was file it, in the specific category of lessons learned the expensive way, carried forward into subsequent decisions with the quiet permanence of things that cost something to acquire. He did not, in any subsequent interview or industry conversation, make reference to the Tuesday morning when he had laughed at the screenplay on the conference table. The laugh was not something he advertised. It was something he knew about privately, with the specific knowledge of a person who made a mistake in front of witnesses and subsequently watched the mistake prove itself in box office returns. Gaines told the story once, years later, at a retirement dinner. "The man walked out of the room," he said, "and I thought, that doesn't look like someone who lost. That looks like someone who just got permission to go prove something." He picked up his glass. He proved it. Pale Rider was not Clint Eastwood's greatest film. It was something more structurally important. It was the film that demonstrated, in the specific and measurable language of box office returns, that the people who knew what the market wanted were sometimes wrong, and that the people who knew what a film needed were sometimes right. and that the distance between those two categories of knowledge was not bridgeable by meetings and notes and the collective confidence of men sitting around a mahogany table with coffee cups and legal pads. Clint went on to direct 36 films, Bird Unforgiven, 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director, Million Dollar Baby, 4 more. A filmography built film by film from the foundation of a production company designed specifically to exist outside the rooms where people laughed at things they didn't understand. He never required those rooms. He required his own judgment, refined across 50 years of making things and watching what happened when they were made. And his own judgment had a track record the rooms could not match. The screenplay that had sat on the mahogany table that Tuesday morning had known what it was, had always known. The room's opinion of it had never been the relevant variable. Some projects survive the rooms that reject them. The ones that do are the ones that never needed the rooms in the first place, that carried their own authority, their own internal logic, their own answer to the question of whether they were worth making. Pale Rider carried all of that. The room laughed. The film answered. 32 days was all it took.